Hello, this is Paul Quinnett. I'm a clinical psychologist. I serve as a clinical assistant professor at the University of Washington's School of Medicine and Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences. I'm also the president and CEO of the QPR Institute, a training organization dedicated to preventing suicide. I've been a longtime member of the Outdoor Writers of America, and I've also been the back page editor for Shooting Times magazine from 1988 to 1995. I've been a gun owner all my life, outdoorsman, fisherman, written a number of books and articles in this area as well as in the area of suicide prevention. What I'm going to present to you in this brief time we have is a talk entitled Reducing a Suicidal and Potentially Homicidal Person's Access to Firearms. We're about trying to prevent suicides and sometimes homicides as well by studying access to firearms and how this contributes to these preventable tragedies. The QPR Institute wishes to thank Elaine Frank and Cathy Barber of Dartmouth University and Harvard University for their contributions to this presentation. Preventing suicide, what you can do. Suicide is a major public health problem in the United States and accounts for almost 40,000 deaths per year. That's about 105 people per day, every day, and among those dead will include about 22 veterans. Too many youth and too many older Americans as well. Firearms are used in the majority of suicides in America, and this is what the topic of our presentation is about. Preventing access to firearms can prevent some suicides and some murder-suicides. This little training program is not anti-gun, but pro-gun safe practices. Traditionally, suicide prevention has focused on who takes their life, when, where, and especially why. What caused this person to take such drastic action? But we are beginning to understand now that how people attempt suicide plays a crucial role in whether they live or die. Let's take a look at the country of Sri Lanka and the use of pesticides. In Sri Lanka, as in most of rural Asia, swallowing pesticides is the most common method of suicide. It's hardly ever used in the U.S. The most human toxic pesticides were banned in the mid to late 90s, and the suicide rate dropped by half, saving 20,000 lives over the period of time studied. Non-fatal poisonings and suicide by other methods did not drop. Rather, they were less likely to die when they made a suicide attempt. People weren't less suicidal, they simply didn't die when they did make an attempt. In other words, the means mattered. Now let's take a look at the United Kingdom and domestic gas. A similar thing happened there. Before 1960, domestic gas was the leading method of suicide in the United Kingdom. There's the oven. Gas was turned on in the oven. People put their heads in the oven, and they died. By 1970, almost all domestic gas in the UK was non-toxic. After a cheaper source of gas, which was not toxic to human life, was introduced, the suicide rate started to drop, and it dropped by nearly a third. The drop was driven by a drop in gas suicides. Non-gas suicides increased slightly. In other words, people who had traditionally used toxic gas from their ovens, who made attempts, didn't die because the gas couldn't kill them. Why does reducing access to lethal means prevent some suicides? How could simply making suicide difficult, making the method less deadly, save lives? After all, if you want to kill yourself, you can always do that. That's what we've believed for a long, long time. Why means matter. The simple answer is yes, you can eventually find a way to take your own life. But the acute phase of a suicidal crisis, the period during which a suicidal person is actually ready to pull the trigger or swallow the poison, is often brief, a matter of minutes or hours, not even days or weeks. When asked how long a period was between deciding on suicide and actually attempting, 24% of people who nearly died in a suicide attempt said they thought about it for less than 5 minutes. So suicide attempts are often quickly undertaken with little planning. What's important here is that some suicide methods are far more deadly than others. The so-called case fatality rate ranges from 1% for some methods of suicide to 85 to 95 or 90% for the most deadly, like firearms. 90% of those people who survive a suicide attempt, even a nearly lethal attempt, do not go on to later die by suicide, which means if you prevent the attempt by reducing the lethality of the method readily at hand during a suicidal crisis, this can make a difference between life and death. Putting time and distance between a suicidal person and a highly lethal means of suicide can save a life, and not just in the short run. Over 70 studies have found that 90% of people who attempt suicide do not go on in yet later years to die by suicide. And this includes studies of people using highly lethal methods like jumping. Why focus on firearms? In the U.S., as I mentioned, firearms account for 51% of deaths by suicide, more than all other methods combined. Gun owners and their families have roughly 3 times higher suicide rate than people who don't live with guns. The higher risk isn't because they are more likely to be suicidal, and they're not more likely to be mentally ill, and they're not more likely to think about suicide or to attempt suicide compared to non-gun owners. Rather, if they do attempt suicide, they're more likely to die from that attempt because guns are the more lethal than most other methods. There's the source for this research. Reducing a suicidal person's access. A simple step to increase a suicidal person's safety is to reduce access to the firearm at home or in someone else's home. Many counselors and providers of health care and family members of at-risk persons simply don't think to do this. But if they did, if they made that firearm difficult to access, they could prevent some suicides. This is a temporary safety intervention and not anti-gun. Making a difference. Family members and friends can protect a suicidal person by temporarily storing all firearms away from the home. You can do this by having a trusted person outside the home hold on to them until the situation improves. You can use a storage facility. Some police departments will do this for you. Gun clubs and gun shops will often store guns on a temporary basis. If off-site storage is not an option, then lock the guns at home with new locks or new combinations. Please don't assume that a suicidal person or someone at risk in your family doesn't know where the guns are. They usually do, or doesn't know the combinations. Keep ammunition out of the home or lock separately. Or remove a key component of the guns, for example, the bolt. We are now promoting the 11th commandment of gun safety. This is a brochure you can get at the end of my presentation. And that 11th commandment is consider temporarily off-site storage if a family member may be suicidal. And I'll go through quickly. This is during emotional crises of some kind, where there might be a breakup, a job loss, facing legal trouble, about to be arrested, facing a court date, some kind of personal crisis is going on, in the context, most typically, when the person is depressed, has a history of being violent or impulsive, and if there's heavy drinking going on. All of these are causes for concerns and justification enough for stowing weapons outside the home to help prevent someone making a tragic error. To keep him safe, when as a young man, Abraham Lincoln was depressed and suicidal. A friend said of him, quotes, "Lincoln told me that he felt like committing suicide often." Seeing suicide warning signs, Lincoln's neighbors mobilized to keep him safe, watching over him and removing his knives and pistol. They pulled together in the same kind of safety net that QPR-trained people or communities or families can do to build a safe community for that person. And in Lincoln's case, included making sure our president did not have access to the means of suicide. It was said that when he again became depressed later in life, serving as our president, that he, quotes, dared not carry even a pocket knife, because Lincoln, as a very smart man, knew that when he was depressed, despairing, and feeling hopeless, that he might impulsively injure himself or kill himself. Now I want to introduce you to the New Hampshire Gun Shop Project and what gun dealers and range masters can do to help prevent suicide. This is from the New Hampshire Firearm Safety Coalition. Recent purchase suicides. 8% of firearm suicides in New Hampshire are with recent purchased guns. A recent purchase means buying or renting a firearm within 1 week of suicide, usually within hours. And 8% is likely a slight underestimate because in 2/3 of the cases, the interval between the acquisition and the death was not noted in the medical examiner's report. The source for this research is medical examiner reports on all 144 firearm suicides in New Hampshire over a 2-year period ending in June 30, 2009. What does this mean? It means that if we educate gun owners about steps to avoid selling a firearm to a suicidal customer, we might avoid that 1 in 10 firearm suicides with recently purchased guns. The second part of this mission is to educate customers about making their firearms inaccessible if a family member is in crisis, the material I just covered with you, and to disseminate the suicide prevention helpline number to help prevent a much larger number of suicides that involve an existing household gun, preventable as well. Suicide is understandable. Suicide makes sense to the suicidal person. But if suicide is to be prevented, how will it be done? Through public awareness, through training, through education, and through action. We're providing you some training and education here. It's up to you to take the action. Suicide warning signs. What are these? Most suicidal people send warning signs. They communicate with others around them about their desire to die, their intent to die, and even sometimes their plan to die and how they would do that. Suicide warning signs can be taught. Once they can be taught, they can be recognized and responded to. So in the simplest terms, a suicide warning sign is a verbal or behavioral signal sent by a suicidal person to someone else indicating that he or she may be considering suicide. People purchasing a firearm to end their own lives may send a detectable suicide warning sign. What is this person saying? Unless you know Morse code, you don't know what this message means. The top line, dit 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 da 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 dit 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 da 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 dit dit dit, will be familiar in that it stands for Save Our Ship, or SOS, a universal distress signal. I apologize for this coded message, but this was my training in the U.S. Army security agency many years ago, and I learned these techniques and how to send and receive and translate coded information. The second line will only be interpretable by someone who knows Morse code, and that line says, "Will someone help me?" followed by the question mark. Why do I do this? Is because, as I said in the prior slide, most people send a warning sign, and these signs can be taught. Now, skipping forward, let's make a quick tutorial here on the difference between a risk factor and a suicide warning sign. Owning a gun is a risk factor, and so is being male, and so is being older, and so is being depressed, and so is being an alcohol abuser. Those are all risk factors. But they differ from a warning sign, because a warning sign is an indication that something bad is about to happen. Talking about shooting oneself is a warning sign, a suicide warning sign. Pointing a gun at one's head is a suicide warning sign. And these are indications that someone is signaling that they may be planning to take their own life. So it's important to separate for the public that guns are not unsafe, but suicidal people are. They're unsafe to themselves and sometimes others. Another diversion here to politeness theory, because this matters in how people will present at your gun shop. We are all polite. We're polite in international diplomacy, when we meet strangers, when we travel outside of our own country, when we're dating, when engaged with authority figures, and we are going to be polite when buying a gun. Why be polite when you are contemplating suicide? It's an interesting question. Suicidal people often use indirect or polite language to communicate suicidal desire, intent, and even planning. Here are some examples. Query to a crisis line volunteer: is 24 aspirins in a bottle of vodka lethal? This is not a chemistry question. This is a question suggesting to the volunteer that I'm considering suicide. If you care about me, please ask me what I mean by this question. We call this a rhetorical question. It comes in many forms to many people in authority positions. Here's a comment to a pharmacist: the doctor said if I took all of these at once, it would kill me. It's probably a good thing because I can't afford another prescription. Again, there's an implied message here which is polite and indirect and needs to be decoded. If suicide warning signs are not confronted, the person may go on to attempt suicide with the belief that since you didn't get it, they now have permission to proceed. Now, here's a polite patient communicating up to a doctor one day before a fatal overdose. This is a case file with which I became familiar. Elderly patient query after receiving a prescription of a tricyclic antidepressant. That's an old generation antidepressant. They're very powerful, but they're also very deadly in overdose. And the patient asked the doctor, if someone took all of this medicine at once, would it kill him? Again, this was not a science question. To which the physician replied, yes, especially if taken with alcohol, so be careful. I will note that tricyclic antidepressants with alcohol are doubly deadly. It's not 2 and 2 make 4, but 2 and 2 make 10, from an overdose point of view. The patient then replied, I understand perfectly, thank you. The patient died by an overdose of that medication prescribed that day on the very next day. Warning sign sent, warning sign missed, no interpretation, no rescue. Now, suicidal gun buyers. Observations made by other gun dealers in New Hampshire during this original research found the following. The buyer had no knowledge about guns, no interest in learning about guns, and asked no questions. The buyer doesn't care which gun he or she buys. The buyer gives unconvincing responses when asked about intended use. There was no interest in firearms maintenance or safety, and they may have mentioned a recent crisis, a divorce, a job loss, or other setback. Our makes comments that could suggest suicidality. For example, I won't have this gun long. This is an indirect, polite, mitigated speech, which is a suicide warning sign that the gun seller may or may not correctly interpret. Gun dealers also noted that such buyers looked anxious, avoided eye contact, and appeared distraught, shaking, fighting back tears. Here are some possible suicide warning signs of things that a potentially suicidal gun buyer might say. Can I buy just one bullet? Is this gun powerful enough to kill a person? I don't need to know how to clean it. Thank you, I finally have a solution. I don't care what caliber it is. This will take care of my alimony payment, and they can't fire me now. These are all coded language for I intend to use this gun to kill myself. Now, I'm a gun owner. I have a substantial collection of guns, and you know and I know that anyone who's gun savvy is looking to buy a gun has a million questions or has spent hours and hours researching that weapon's configuration, its downrange velocity, its all kinds of technical questions will have been answered prior to making that purchase. Someone who presents as this naive is probably not purchasing a weapon to compete in the shooting arena, to plink, or to go hunting. These are people purchasing a weapon for a single tragic purpose. So use your power to prevent suicide and gun violence. I'll admit suicidal people are not always easy to spot, and it is impossible to detect a competent liar. But most suicidal people are actually hoping you will stop them. They're hoping you will say something or do something that will cause them to rethink their decision. This term for this behavior is called ambivalence, and it's going back and forth on a decision of great importance. Should I do this or shouldn't I do this? And we have stories from the Golden Gate Bridge of people just about to jump, hoping that someone would stop them, ask them did they need help, or otherwise intervene with them so that they did not have to carry out a permanent and final act. In your store, a suicidal gun buyer will often use polite, indirect speech to communicate their personal distress or plans for the use of the firearm they are seeking. And it's up to you to trust your gut and clarify the meaning of a statement like, now they'll be sorry. And I want to emphasize trusting your gut, because suicidal people, at the moment they're making this decision, are often distraught and will make you uncomfortable with their behavior. Your discomfort equals fear of what is about to happen. And fear is much more trustworthy than logic or reason, and you really need to trust your discomfort and uncomfortable feelings when transacting this sale. This New Hampshire firearm retailer's poster is available to you, and I'm going to make this available at the end of my remarks. But it recaps what I've just covered with you in terms of the lessons I've tried to impart. But I do want to go through the options you have to respond to a potentially suicidal buyer. Options for responding to a potentially suicidal gun buyer. Notify the store owner or manager if applicable, if at all uncomfortable with the prospective sale. Urge the customer with little firearms experience to seek training before buying. Ask the customer why he or she wants a firearm and how and where he or she intends to use it. Suggest to the customer that they take some more time before making a purchase. Give themselves some time to think this over. Here are some more options. If he or she claims to be buying a weapon for self-defense, offer to sell pepper spray instead. Ask the person directly if he or she is suicidal. If they say yes, offer the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline number listed here. Or if you have other resources or know someone you can refer them to, take that action. Notify other nearby gun dealers that someone you denied a sale to may go to their store so they don't make that sale, and also notify the police. Again, trust your instincts. You are not under obligation to sell a gun to anyone. What else can I do? Well, you can display a suicide prevention hotline poster in your store. I'll tell you how to get one. You can distribute firearm safety brochures to buyers that include information about recognizing suicide warning signs and keeping firearms away from suicidal or depressed family members. You can visit the websites listed here and spread the word. Ask other gun dealers you know or range masters to visit these websites and learn how to help prevent suicide and, by so doing, undesirable gun violence. You can learn QPR Gatekeeper Training for Suicide Prevention. This is a 1 hour to 2 hour training program in how to intervene with suicidal people. It's available through our website and by our more than 5,000 trainers around the United States. This is what we call the lethal triad. It consists of an upset person for any reason: angry, sad, depressed, intoxicated, or all three, and the readily availability of a firearm, and with particularly having alcohol on board. When these three things are present, the risk of violent behavior is very high. So we ask everyone, can you reduce any of the points of this triangle? Sober the person up, talk them down, and make sure they don't have access to a firearm. If we could take all of these actions at once with everybody who enters a suicidal crisis, and that period of risk that may last only a few minutes to a few hours, we could prevent suicide in substantial numbers. You're part of that solution. For more information, here are some important websites. meansmatter.org, it's Harvard University. Calm Training, counseling access to lethal means is available free. It's online. You can also request technical assistance from Cathy Barber at Harvard School of Public Health. You can request an in-person calm training from Elaine Frank at Dartmouth. You can download gunshot materials from www.nhfsc.org, and you can watch a video on suicide prevention for gun dealers on this YouTube link listed here. For more information about the QPR Institute and our training programs, you can just visit our website. So thank you for your time. Here's my personal contact information. I'm happy to take calls or emails pretty much any time. Again, thank you for your time and attention, and we invite you to participate in the National Strategy for Suicide Prevention 2012 by becoming better informed and taking whatever action you can as someone in the firearms industry to help prevent suicide. Again, thanks for your time.